Today, I'm going to show you how to configure your UniFi network just like the professionals do. Let's get into it. Now, if you're an IT professional, you may want to check out our enterprise configuration guide where we dive into much more depth within UniFi network and show you some things that maybe you didn't think you could do within UniFi that you actually can. This video is going to cover more of the fundamentals, things like what is a router, what is a switch, what is an access point. We're going to cover virtual LANs. We're going to talk about basic network security, everything that a new user needs to get up and running within the UniFi network. Now, if you are a new user, you're probably wondering what type of equipment should you buy? And there's three types of devices within the UniFi gear that are appropriate for your network. And you may have heard the term wireless router, something like this. This is a UniFi Express 7. Now, a wireless router is a bit of a colloquial term because it actually is encompassing three different devices in one. In this case, this is a router. It routes traffic from the internet to your local network. It's a network switch, so you can plug in other devices into it, which this only has one port for that, but it's still a network switch. And it is a wireless access point because this has a radio that will broadcast Wi-Fi. In the business and enterprise world, those are typically separate devices like you see here. We have a cloud gateway, we have a network switch where we can plug in all of our various devices, and we have a PDU down here. And somewhere else in our building, we would have a wireless access point typically mounted on the ceiling or within a wall. And I'm going to assume that for your configuration, we have these devices broken out separately. Now, the benefit of this is that every device is doing its own thing to the best of its ability, so it's better performance and better reliability. It also means that we can scale our network. So if we need more connectivity, we can deploy another network switch somewhere else in our building, and we can deploy as many Wi-Fi access points as we need to achieve adequate Wi-Fi coverage. Now, if you're shopping for UniFi gear, you're probably wondering what gateway should I get, what switch should I get, and it can be quite confusing, especially if you're not a network engineer. We do offer pre-sales consulting. You can check that out in the video description down below where we can jump on a call with you for an hour and just answer any questions that you might have about what gear is best for your particular deployment. Now, it is best to start with a clean config, so before we do our configuration, I'm going to go ahead and reset this equipment, and then we'll do our config. Now, for this configuration, I'm going to be using the Dream Machine Pro Max, a Pro Max 24 PoE, a PDU, and we're going to be using the Pro XGS access point. We'll get to that in a sec. Now, if you notice that I've got pretty much everything unplugged from the network switch, and that's best practice. The only thing we have plugged in is our internet going into the WAN port on the Dream Machine Pro Max, and then we have the Dream Machine Pro Max plugging in to the network switch. You can also use a fiber cable to do this, or a direct attached copper cable, a DAC cable, and that will save you from burning one of those copper ports. Now that we have those devices connected, we need to create our Ubiquiti account. Now, it's best practice to create an account that's going to be unique in your organization for owning the console. Now, I recommend creating an alias under your company domain, such as it@yourdomain.com, and then creating your main Ubiquiti account with that. From there, you can then assign permissions to various users, including yourself. This is just a better security practice, and it's just generally good housekeeping. Now, to create our account, we're going to head on over to unifi.ui.com. We'll click Create Account here, and then we'll need to give it a username. In this case, we're going to create an account for Florida Coffee. Now, unlike a lot of other companies, Ubiquiti doesn't spam your inbox with updates, so if you want to hear when the latest products are coming out, go ahead and take that option for the newsletter. And then we'll create our account. Awesome. Now that we have our account created, we're going to go ahead and do a very critical change that will determine whether or not your network will or will not be stable, and that is switching our interface into dark mode. Really, this just comes down to preference, but if you're a developer or a technical person, dark mode is better. Now, we can set up our device from the desktop. We can actually just log into the IP address of the UDM by plugging into it and configure it that way. But it's a lot easier if you just have a phone, grab the UniFi app from the App Store, open it, click the plus button in the upper left-hand corner, and you'll see your console right here. In this case, Dream Machine Pro. We'll connect to it, and we can name it. I'm going to call it FC UDM for Florida Coffee UDM Pro. We'll click Next. It's going to run a quick speed test to see what our ISP capabilities are. We can, of course, edit these later in settings as well. Now, this is a really cool setting that's especially important for environments where you're going to be using most of your internet bandwidth. This will essentially ensure that Google Meet, Teams, Zoom, and important traffic like that is prioritized over other traffic. So if someone's playing a video game, your Google Meet call shouldn't be disrupted when you have this setting enabled. And then it's going to configure our UniFi console. Should take about 5 or 10 minutes depending on what firmware our console is on, and then it's going to update to the latest firmware. And we can see that on our screen right here. It just updated. Now that we've adopted our Dream Machine Pro Max, we're going to transition to doing our configuration on Site Manager. Now you can do the entire configuration on your phone. It just is a lot easier to do this on a desktop. Now, Site Manager is pretty cool, and we can access it anytime by going to unifi.ui.com. And you'll see if you have multiple sites, each site will be its own tile. Now, in our case, you're probably wondering, what is that giant red mark there? This is a pretty cool instrument here. This is a representation of time along this axis, and the colors indicate what our internet connectivity looks like. You can see when I first plugged in the Dream Machine Pro Max, I didn't have any internet. That's indicated by red, whereas now we have a stable connection. If you see yellow there, that means that we have a generally unstable internet connection. So maybe it's dropping in and out or experiencing some sort of packet loss. Could be a bad cable, could be an issue with your provider. Now we're gonna go ahead and click into this site. And here we can see our dashboard. Now this is really cool because this gives us a bird's eye view of everything going on within our network. There's not a whole lot of data here right now because it's a brand new configuration. Now you can see our uptime is pretty bad, but that will hopefully get better. We can see our latency to 3 critical providers. Now, you've probably heard that internet speed matters a lot, but the truth is that matters a lot less than latency. Latency is how long it actually takes for us to get to that particular site. In this case, we're pinging Microsoft, Google, and Cloudflare. This is a much better test of how snappy your internet connection is. We have some radio stuff down here, but I want to give you a tour here of the left-hand sidebar. Here we have our topology, which is pretty simple right now, our internet provider, in this case, GTT Communications. We have our gateway and then our network switch. Our UniFi devices, and you can see our network switch here is not yet adopted. We'll take care of that in a second. Our client devices, in which case you can see that there's really none, but these were the historic devices that have been on the network. You know that they're active because they'll have a green light right here. Our port configuration for our UDM, and insights. This is where we can take a look at network security and a ton of other data on our network. Settings is where we'll do the bulk of our configuration, and we'll get here shortly. Our logs, we can see both critical and non-critical security logs. Alarm Manager is really cool. We can create custom alarms. If you've ever had a system like this before, it can be troublesome to figure out like what alerts are important and what are not. You can actually set this up so it could send a ticket to your IT provider if you have a network issue, or maybe to your office manager if the network's down, so they know it's a Wi-Fi issue or it's a provider issue. It's pretty cool. You can spend a lot of time customizing things in here. And of course, our admins and users, where we can add additional users to the console. Now, the first thing we're going to do is go to UniFi devices, and we're going to adopt our network switch. Awesome. You can see our switch has been adopted and it's fully updated to the latest firmware. Now, you might notice this IP address 192.168.1.1, and our switch is at .64. This is a Class C address, which is typically used in home environments. We're going to change this to our own scheme, and it's going to be a Class A scheme. And we're also going to set static IP addresses for all of our UniFi devices. To do that, we're going to go to Settings. We're going to click on Networks. And then you see this default network here. We're going to click into here, and we're going to rename this to Core Network. And the core network is going to be used strictly for our network infrastructure. You're probably wondering, we have more networks? Yes, we'll get to virtual networks here in a minute. We're going to uncheck Auto Scale Network, and we're going to give it a custom host address. Now this is a Class C address, very common in home deployments, and it's really the default that every network infrastructure ships with, but we're going to change this to a Class A. A Class A starts with 10, and we can actually customize pretty much everything after that 10. A common practice is to use the second octet as a location identifier. So if you have more than one facility, you could do like 10.1, 10.2, and as you have more facilities, you could scale that number up. Now we have to make sure this is a certain type of scheme. I'm not going to dive too deep into IP scheming, but if you're doing it wrong, UniFi will tell you, as it is right now. In this case, I like to pick a number that is fun. We went to the moon in 1969. I'm a big Apollo fan, if you can't tell. So I always do 10.69. And then we're going to do 1 on the third octet. The third octet we're going to use for our subnet, in this case, the core network, and then .1 for the router address. This is a /24, which means that we have 249 usable devices. This is important. If you're planning on deploying a network that's going to have more than that number of devices on a particular network, you need to make sure that you use a lower subnet. It's a bit confusing. We're not going to dive into IP theory right now, but just know that for most networks, a /24 is what you should be using. We're going to switch this to manual. And then we're going to change the DHCP range to start at 100. And we're going to tell it to stop at 199. This is because we're going to be setting static IP addresses for our switches on the bottom end and for our access points on the top end. This way UniFi doesn't accidentally assign duplicate devices to the same IP address. Although that should be a moot point since we do have ping conflict detection, it's still best practice. I'm going to change our domain name to coffee.local. There's no reason that we need to do this, it's just cool. And the last thing that we're going to change here is DNS. We're going to untick that from auto because we're going to put on our own DNS servers. Now DNS stands for the domain name system. Basically, your device doesn't know how to get to google.com. It needs to get routed to an IP address, similar to this here, but an external IP address. Think of it like Aunt Susie's house. You know where Aunt Susie's house is because you have the physical address. But the physical address is like the IP address and Aunt Susie's house is like google.com. Because DNS is used like the mapping software to route us to those destinations, we can actually use it to block certain content like malware and sensitive content. And we can also do this natively within the UniFi network, but it's a good practice to do it at the DNS layer as well. Now, a couple of providers that are really common to look at are Google. You can just type in 8.8.8.8 and use Google DNS. Cloudflare is 1.1.1.1. They're known for being more low latency and they're typically closer to your network, so it'll be a little bit snappier. If you want to take a more privacy focused approach, you can use Quad 9, which you guessed it is 9.9.9.9. In this case, we're going to be using Cloudflare, which has a different set of addresses we can use to block both malware and sensitive content. Now, it's important to note that it is best practice to use two different DNS providers. That way, if one provider goes down, you can still get on the internet and access things. Now, devices will cache those records, but at a certain point in time, or if you try to hit a new website and that provider goes down, you're not going to be able to get there. However, if you are doing malware and adult content filtering, you want to use the same provider's addresses. Otherwise, when one address doesn't provide that IP address, it will go to the next DNS server, which will provide that address. We need to make sure we're using both addresses for both fields. And we can add up to 4 if we want to. In this case, we're going to grab Cloudflare's IPs. And then we're going to apply our settings. Now, this is a disruptive change to our network because we're re-scheming the core network. So the local address of our gateway is going to change, as well as our switch is going to need to change its address as well. I'm going to go back to UniFi devices, and while that's configuring, I'm going to unplug our switch. And then I'm going to plug it back in. This is just the fastest way to ensure that it grabs a new IP address in this scheme rather than the 192 scheme we were using before. You can see the switch is getting ready and it has a new address in our new scheme. Cool, it's up to date. Now we're going to do our switch config. Let's click into this switch. We're going to go to settings. We're going to scroll down and we're going to give it a static IP address. Now in this case, we're going to do 10.69.1.2. If you have more than one switch, you can keep counting up. Our DNS, we're going to use the same DNS service we used just a moment ago. And then our subnet mask is going to be as follows. And then our gateway will be the IP address of our gateway. Now, if you're following my guide, you can use this exact same configuration and it will work for you. While that's configuring, let's talk about VLANs, or virtual local area networks. VLANs are really cool, especially for business. Let's say that you want to offer guest Wi-Fi to your guest, and maybe you want to have a separate Wi-Fi network for your IoT devices, things like thermostats or TVs or HomePods. And you want these to be separate so they can't talk to each other for security. Well, back in the old days, back in 2005, these would be physically separate networks, separate local area networks, separate LANs. Well, what if we do all of that on the same physical network infrastructure? That's where VLANs come in. We can create separate virtual networks within UniFi, and then we can define traffic rules to block or allow traffic between those VLANs. And I'm going to show you how to do that now. We're going to click on our settings gear again. We're going to go to network, and we're going to create a new virtual network right here. Now I'm going to create a couple. I'm going to show you how to make the first one, and then you'll get the idea for the rest of them. This one's going to be for our staff, so we're going to call it staff network. We're going to make sure that our UDM is selected for the router. We're going to uncheck auto scale network, and we're going to do 10.69.2.1/24 as well. I'm going to match this VLAN ID to this third octet, in this case 2. The VLAN ID is just an internal number used to actually tag the VLAN. It doesn't have to match, but it just is good housekeeping. Now we're going to isolate this network. This means that UniFi is going to create a bunch of firewall rules to make sure that devices on this network can talk to each other. So if I have a printer and a computer, they can communicate, but this network can't talk to the core network or to the guest network or any other networks that we create. We're going to make sure we allow internet access. We're going to allow multicast DNS because that's a protocol that's used for things like Apple TV, Bonjour, AirPrint, AirPlay. It's used for a lot of different protocols that are common in an office environment. It can be trickier on larger networks, so you may want to disable it if this is a much larger network. And then I'm going to change this to start at 20 so we can use the bottom range to assign printers with static IP addresses. I'm also going to untick DNS, and we're going to use those same DNS servers that we used before. We're going to scroll down, and we're going to change our domain name to coffee.local. Again, this is not necessarily a Windows environment, so it doesn't matter, but it just is cool, so let's do it. And we're going to leave ping conflict detection on. This basically means that UniFi is going to double check that an IP address is not in use before it assigns it to a new device. And that's it. Now we're going to do the same thing for our guest network. In this case, we're going to do 10.69.6.1. And remember, this being a /24 means that we can only have up to 249 usable addresses on it. Going to change this to manual, and we're going to make this 6. Now in this case, we're going to enable guest network. This is a couple more firewall rules than isolating the network, but it still allows clients to talk to each other. So we're going to disable that on the Wi-Fi side later because we don't want a bad actor on our Wi-Fi network to be able to target your other customers or guests on your network. In this case, we're going to leave the DHCP range as it is, but we will update our DNS to have the same IPs that we had before. For the domain name, we're going to do coffee-guest.local. Then we'll add the network. Next, we'll do our IoT network. For this, I like to use an octet of 5. We'll change the VLAN ID to 5 as well. We'll isolate this network. We will allow internet access. And we're going to change this to 100 so we can manually assign IP addresses if we want to. We'll also update our DNS. Awesome. So we now have our VLANs created, and you can see that they have a unique IP scheme each here. Now, a couple more that you may want to create depending on your environment is one for your security cameras and door access control. I like to use the third octet for that being 4. You may want to create one unique for your VoIP phones if your phones are on a separate network. I like to use 3 for that. And any other kind of weird edge case device that you just want to isolate and have on its own separate network. And we can assign those to Wi-Fi networks and to switch ports, which we'll get to in a second. Now, let's go ahead and configure these on our network switch next. We're going to go back to UniFi devices. We're going to click on our network switch. We're going to go to port manager. And then we're going to select all of these ports. So I've selected all of my copper ports, excluding the one that I'm using to connect to the gateway. And you can see we have this config here on the right. I'm going to change a couple things here. I'm going to set this to block all, and this is going to block accessing any other VLANs. And I'm going to change it to our staff network. Now, it's actually best practice security to just disable the ports, but in most business environments, that's quite a pain. So we're going to just set it to staff. And we'll apply our changes. Now, while we're here, I'm going to go ahead and plug in our PDU so we can adopt it. Now we can see that our PDU is detected, so we're going to go ahead and click Add to adopt it. Now, you may notice that the PDU is having some difficulty getting adopted. Any guess as to what the reason for that is? It's because the staff network is what that's plugged into. And the staff network is isolated, so it can't talk to the core network. And a lot of our UniFi gear just likes to be on the core network. Now, it should still adopt, but we want to put it on our core network because that's where all the UniFi infrastructure should live. So we're going to go back to our network switch. We're going to open up Port Manager. We're going to go to this port here, and we're going to change this from our staff network to our core network. and we're going to apply. Now, it's also really important that wherever we plug in our wireless access points into are set to all the VLANs and allow all traffic. In this case, I'm going to plug my AP into port 20. So while we're here, let's head on over to port 20 and make that change. Here, we're going to set the native VLAN to core, and we're going to make sure that we tick allow all. And PoE++ should be enabled. Now, if you don't know what port your AP is going to be plugged into, you can plug in your AP once you see it here, change that configuration, and either unplug it physically and plug it back in, or power cycle it right here within UniFi. Now, while we're waiting for that PDU to come back up, let's do a bit of housekeeping and give our switch a name. I feel like that's a good name for our switch. And we'll click apply. Now that our PDU is back online, we'll do the same thing. And while we're in here, let's go ahead and give it a static IP. Again, if you're in doubt, you can copy my configuration exactly. Then we'll click on outlets. Let's go ahead and name our outlets. In this case, I know that port 1 is our network switch, and port 2 is our gateway. Now, you don't have to do this. It's just good housekeeping. And if you ever need to hard restart a device remotely, it makes it a lot easier to know which device you're pulling the plug on. I'm going to click sort by IP address. It's just a good way to view all of our devices. We've configured our gateway and our network switch, but there's a big part of our network that's still missing. Wi-Fi. And in this case, we're going to be using the U7 Pro XG. This is a great all-around AP, and ideally we would have more than one, but this is a demo. I am going to show you how you would configure a network with more than one Wi-Fi access point, and we're going to have more than one Wi-Fi network. Let's get this guy unboxed, and we'll plug it into our network switch. This is a very clean AP, and look how thin that is. Now they have this little plastic cover. Make sure you take that off because this will emit heat, but it's great to keep your fingerprints off of it when you are installing it in the ceiling. Now it's important that we plug this into a port on our network switch that is tagged with all of our VLANs and is not blocking all traffic. And we'll double check that in UniFi, but in our case, it's going to be port 20. I already have a network cable here. I'm just going to plug this AP in. Now you may notice that this access point is flashing white. That means that it is still booting up. Once it turns solid white, that means that it is ready to be adopted and is a fresh, brand new or factory reset device. When it turns solid blue, that is the indicator that it is fully configured. Now within UniFi, we can see the prompt to adopt it. I'm just going to go to the UniFi devices to show you that it also appears here, and we're going to click to adopt. And you'll notice this changes to blue, indicating that the device is fully adopted. It will take a couple minutes for the device to update to the latest firmware, so we'll grab a cup of coffee and be right back. Now that our AP is adopted and updated, we can also go ahead and plug in our other client devices. Let's go ahead and do that now. Now we have all of our client devices plugged into our network switch. You can see them lining up with Etherlighting. This is one of the benefits of the Pro Max switch lineup is we can have Etherlighting. And I'm going to show you a couple of the settings that you can do with Etherlighting. Now, we can do this globally, so if we go to any one network switch, we can change these settings and they'll apply to all of our switches on this particular site. So we're going to go to switch 01, we're going to go to config, and then you can see the default configuration is speed. So all of the blue devices are connected at 2.5 gigabits per second, and the yellow device is actually the PDU, which is connected at just 100 meg per second. But I like to change that, and we're going to change that to identify it based on the network. So our core network will be blue, our IoT network will be green, our staff network will be purple, and then guest will be orange. There you have it. And you can customize these to be whatever colors you want. And again, if you do it on one switch, it will apply to all of your switches. Now back to Wi-Fi. We're going to go to settings, Wi-Fi, and then here we can create our Wi-Fi network. I'm going to create one for staff and then one for guest. We can give our Wi-Fi network a password. Now, there are types of network configurations you can do that allow you to have multiple passwords, so you could have different passwords for each user. But in this case, we're just going to have one password to keep it simple. But if you're scaling an organization, it is better practice to use something like the BPA Enterprise, not a single password for your entire org. Now, I recommend using a password that is at least 12 characters, unique to this particular thing, so not using this password anywhere else, but 12 characters with a capital letter, a symbol, and a number. We're going to change the network to use the staff VLAN that we created earlier. We're going to broadcast this on all of our access points. We're going to change advanced and change it to manual. We're going to keep hotspot off. And we're going to enable multicast environment. Now this does add some performance overhead, but it's ideal for things like AirPrint, Apple TV, AirPlay, and other types of devices that use multicast traffic. Down here for security protocol, we have a couple options. The first option we have is open, and I really don't recommend this for any network, even our guest network, because we don't have any control over who is joining our Wi-Fi. The second option we have is WPA2, and you may notice that that is grayed out. And the reason that that is grayed out is because this is a 6 gigahertz capable access point. So if we want to use WPA2, we need to disable 6 gigahertz. Now 6 gigahertz is the newest band. It's what more modern devices support, and it enables us to have some really fast connectivity. However, it also does not work at great ranges, which is why 2.4 and 5 gigahertz are still very important bands to have. But once we undisable that, you'll notice that WPA2 becomes available. But in our configuration, we're going to enable that, and we're going to scroll down here, and we're going to do WPA2/3. Now, the most secure configuration you can do would be WPA3. Well, the most secure config you can do would be WPA3 Enterprise, where everyone has their own unique password, but in our configuration, we're able to run WPA3. This decision depends on what devices you have in your organization. If you have mostly modern devices, which Florida Coffee does, we can do WPA3, which is more secure. Now we'll just go ahead and provision the Wi-Fi network. Now this is a hard provision, so at least for the time being in the current version of UniFi Network, this will cause the AP to drop offline in terms of delivering connectivity. We'll go ahead and create our second Wi-Fi network though while we wait. We're also going to give this Wi-Fi a password, and then we're going to change the VLAN from the native network to the guest network that we created earlier. We'll then go to advanced, and we can use a captive portal if we want to. This is basically a landing page that people see before they are able to access the Wi-Fi. But in our case, I'm just going to turn that off. We can broadcast on all 3 bands. We're going to make sure that multicast environment is disabled, and we are going to enable client device isolation. Remember earlier when I talked about Wi-Fi security for our guest, we don't want one client device to be able to talk to another client device. That way, if a bad actor joins our network, they can't attack other devices on the network. Well, at least not easily. Then we're going to scroll down, and we're going to keep WPA2/3 enabled. We don't know what types of devices are going to be joining our network, and this is intelligent. So if they have an older device that can only handle WPA2, it won't let them connect to the 6 gigahertz band, just 2.4 and 5. But if they can take advantage of the higher bandwidth and performance of 6 gigahertz, they'll be able to do that with WPA3. Now, I know I said I was only going to configure 2 networks, but we should go ahead and configure one for IoT, since most IoT devices are going to be on a Wi-Fi network, and the way that we do that is a little bit different than how we do it for these 2 networks. I'm just going to call this one FC IoT for Florida Coffee IoT. I want to keep that name as short as possible, since I might be scrolling on a thermostat to type that in. Now for IoT, I wouldn't recommend using symbols. Some IoT devices kind of act weird when you try to type a symbol into them. So let's just use upper and lowercase letters, and then we'll use numbers. And we're going to do a 14-character passcode to make up for the disadvantages of not being able to use symbols. We're going to switch this to manual. We're going to make sure that captive portal is off. We're going to enable enhanced IoT connectivity. This is the most important setting for the IoT network. And you can see that that turns off 5 and 6 gigahertz. It's going to strictly use the 2.4 gigahertz band. Now this band is slower, but that's okay because most modern devices aren't using this band, so radio space will be freed up with this band. There is a lot of legacy tech that's using it in most RF environments, but let's face it, most devices nowadays are going to be on these higher bands, and IoT devices just don't use a whole lot of bandwidth in general. Now, 2.4 gigahertz also has a better range than 5 and 6 gigahertz, so there's a big advantage there. We're going to enable multicast environment since most IoT devices do use multicast. And in our case, we're going to keep client device isolation disabled. Now, if our IoT devices don't need to talk to each other and they're all just going to the internet, we can enable that for additional security. And for this, we're going to use WPA2 because most IoT devices may or may not support WPA3. There, we have our networks. Now that we've configured our Wi-Fi networks, those are going to all be provisioned to this AP. But we want to make sure that our radios are optimized for the environment that we're operating in. Now, if you're out in the middle of the country and you have one AP, you don't really need to do anything for the most part. But if you're in a more dense urban area, you're going to have a lot of chatter from other Wi-Fi networks in your area. And so optimizing your APs is important. Thankfully, UniFi makes this really simple, especially for smaller deployments. We can just basically leave everything in auto. And I'm going to scroll down here and show you what that looks like. Here you can see our channel coverage, and this will fill in over time, both with where our APs are operating at. You can see the 2.4, the 5, and the 6 gigahertz bands, and where other APs are operating that maybe is more congested, and you'll see those fill in other colors here. In this case, AP has just recently come online, so it hasn't had time to do a full scan of the RF environment. But this is a bird's eye view of the spectrum. And you can see 6 gigahertz has way more spectrum than 5 and even especially than 2.4. Now, if we scroll down here, we can actually customize kind of how we want to optimize our Wi-Fi. Now, by default, it's set to conservative, and I recommend you leave it there because in the Wi-Fi world, unreliability is much more noticeable than, slower performance. So we want to make sure that our Wi-Fi is reliable first, and then we can focus on performance. Doing a daily Wi-Fi optimization is definitely a good idea, and we can run that optimization right now if we want to. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, this will take down the AP for a few minutes. Now, since we're not going to be using Wi-Fi meshing, I'm going to go ahead and turn that off to save us on some compute resources. And then we're going to apply our changes. And you can see right now this is analyzing our spectrum. Now let's talk about network security. Network security matters more and more every single day because more and more of what we do is happening on the network. Now, most traffic is encrypted. So what that means is when your computer connects to google.com, that traffic is encrypted so that even if I'm sniffing packets, I can see that you're going to google.com and how much data is being exchanged. I can't see what you're searching for. That said, I can still tell a lot by doing a packet sniff and seeing what you're doing. And metadata in aggregate is data. It's not metadata anymore. And so network security is really critical, and there are exploits available where if someone does have access to your network, they can compromise certain services or compromise vulnerabilities more often on a device that can then be used to access your data. And in a business world, this is the difference between you keeping your doors open and not being able to recover. Even if you have cybersecurity insurance, like just because you have fire insurance doesn't mean that you shouldn't have fire extinguishers in your building. And the same is true with cybersecurity. And I see a lot of businesses thinking that cybersecurity is coverage for good internal IT security. And it's not. Because even if you have a good policy, most businesses, especially small businesses, don't recover from the PR disaster that comes when all of their customer data is leaked and now their customers have to go and deal with identity theft issues. So very important that we keep our data secure. We want to be good stewards of the customer data that we have and good stewards of our resources. So we want to make sure that we secure things properly. And UniFi makes that very easy. And we're going to do that right now over here in the Cybersecure tab. Now, Cybersecure is UniFi's enhanced threat protection and intelligence service. They've partnered with Proofpoint to make this happen, and Proofpoint is an industry leader. They pull in threat signatures from all various sources, including Microsoft and many, many others. And essentially what they do is they use these to create signatures to look for threats or bad actors on your network. So if a PC is compromised, maybe it's poking around in the network and trying to see if anyone else's could be compromised, Cybersecure will detect this if it aligns with the signature, and then based on our settings, it will either alert you or shut down that traffic. And we can customize what it does there. We can also do content filtering, which is pretty cool, and we'll show you that in a sec. Now we're going to go and activate it. Now for the enhanced version of Cybersecure, it is $100 a year, more than worth it. Now that Cybersecure is enabled, let's go ahead and enable region blocking. Now you don't have to have Cybersecure to enable region blocking. This is just the first thing that we're going to do. And we're going to block countries that are known to have common bad actors. Now, some of you are probably wondering, why did I block Ukraine? Well, a lot of the Ukrainian IP block may be controlled by Russia, so we're going to block that just to be safe. We're then going to turn on our intrusion prevention right here. And you can see we can choose which networks we want to apply this to. Now, in our case, we're just going to do this on all of our networks. We then have two options for detection mode. Should it just notify us or notify and block the traffic? For most of you, I'm going to recommend that you select notify and block. And then we can choose the various categories we want this to look through. I'm going to recommend that you keep this at its default settings. Now, if you find that you're getting false positives on certain devices, you can actually add host as exceptions here. Now we'll just apply our changes. That's it. You just set up Proofpoint for your entire network. And this is going to be updated daily with the latest intelligence from Proofpoint. Now let's go over to Content Filter. And this is pretty cool. We can enforce things like safe search and block types of traffic by category. Now let's go ahead and set up a policy for our staff network to block things that people just shouldn't be doing in the workspace. Now I've gone through each category and blocked what I think would be ideal to block for our staff network. You can see my list here and change it according to what you would like in your environment. Now at the very top here, we do have the option to ad block. Now ad blocking is pretty awesome, but there's a big problem. A lot of the first results in a search engine are actually ads, and most users don't realize that. And so when they go to click on a particular website, they think that the internet is broken. So depending on your environment, you may or may not want to enable ad block. Safe search is also good to enable, so we're going to enforce that on Google and on Bing. I do find it to be a bit aggressive on YouTube, blocking even things like news websites or news videos, so we're going to leave it disabled there. And we're going to leave filtering at enhanced, which is here where we can modify everything. If we just want to block malware and basic inappropriate content, we can select there, but I'm just going to go back to enhanced. Now down here at the bottom, we do have our allow list and our block list. This is great because if we always want to block a particular website, we can just add it right here. Or if we're having false positives on our content filtering, we can add them here. There's also good use cases where maybe we need to add exceptions. Maybe you are a law firm and you're doing research into certain topics that the default list would block, but you just need to look up one or two websites. You can add them here rather than unchecking that for the entire category for the network. The other really cool thing is we can actually set this to operate on a schedule. So we can make it more aggressive during certain hours or turn it off during certain hours. Lastly, we need to give it a name and select our source. In this case, we're going to apply this policy to our staff network, but you can see we can apply this to multiple networks if we want to, and we can even apply it to specific devices. Then we'll click Add. So there is our policy. If we wanted to add more, we could click New and create as many unique policies as we want to for various devices and networks. So we've set up CyberSecure, our intrusion prevention and detection solution for our network. We also enabled content filtering for our staff network. Now I'm going to recommend that you enable content filtering for your guest network as well. One, because your staff could just switch to the guest network, but two, it is common for people maybe to do things on your Wi-Fi network that they wouldn't do at home, like torrenting media. So make sure that you do lock it down in that regard to prevent that. And you can use the same policy and apply it there, or create a unique one specifically for your guest network. Now, that's a great, beyond great start for making our network secure with what we've done, but good IT security doesn't start with just advanced IDS and IPS. It starts with good IT practice and good IT housekeeping. And a big part of that is keeping our UniFi devices up to date so they are patched for the latest vulnerabilities when they drop. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a second, but first I want to give you just a tour of the interface here on the left of things we haven't covered. Now, you're really not going to need to dive into any of these, and we're not going to cover these in depth. This is a beginner's guide, but I just want you to be familiar with what these buttons do within UniFi so you are aware and aren't afraid of the interface. Now, the next thing that we have below CyberSecure is our policy engine, and you're going to see these three icons here. The first is our policy table. Now, if you've ever had to open a port on your router to let certain types of traffic in, we can do that here with port forwarding. We also have a lot more advanced configurations that we can do, including DNS, ACLs, routes, and editing our NAT. Here we have our firewall. Now, we can enable our zone-based firewall if we want to. We have a whole video where we walk you through how to use a zone-based firewall, but for our purposes, we're just going to leave this alone. And we have object networking, which does require us to enable our zone-based firewall. Again, this is a beginner's guide. We're not going to go too in-depth into this. But if you don't really mess with any of this, with what we've done so far, your network is by default secure. Down here, we have profiles. Now, profiles are pretty cool. Now, one that you may want to create for your environment if you have limited bandwidth and a lot of guests on your network is a Wi-Fi speed profile. The default is unlimited, and we can create one and just do a speed limit to our, maybe we want to say 50 megs, right, for our Wi-Fi network. And we can call that guest. And then if we want to apply that, we would jump back up to Wi-Fi, go to our guest network, click here, and then guest, and apply that change. We can also enable Radius if we want to run a Radius server on our UDM or use our existing third-party Radius server. Next, we have system. Most of this is pretty basic and we don't really need to modify any of it, but we are going to jump over to backups and make sure that auto backup is turned on. And now that we've completed our configuration, we're going to download a copy of our existing config and put it somewhere safe. Maybe a USB drive that you can put in a safe somewhere physically, or just on your backup server if you happen to have one. Now, you should always keep a local backup, because what if you lose access to your UniFi account? You can have a local backup to get your network back up and running. Next, we'll go to control plane. Here's where we can update all of our UniFi applications as well as the console itself, which is the UDM Pro in this case. You can see there is an update available for network, and we can also install other applications like Protect, Access, and Talk. Now, some of these applications may require a hard drive, like Protect is going to need something to record that footage too, and we can see the status of that if we go to storage here. You can see we don't have any hard drives installed, but if we did, we could configure the RAID array right from here and see the health of those drives. Console is where we can set up high availability. If you had two of these, you could actually configure them in a way where if one failed, the other one would pick up your traffic immediately. Great for more critical environments where high availability is essential. Lastly, we have the push notification section. If you're using the UniFi app, you probably want to customize which notifications are important to you so that if there is an issue with your network, you actually pay attention to those notifications rather than waiting on everyone in the office to call you asking what's wrong with the Wi-Fi. Now, down here at the very bottom is identity. Identity is pretty cool, but we're going to cover that in a future video. Well, I hope you guys enjoy this beginner's guide to UniFi Network. Please let me know down in the comments what questions you had. What would you like to see us answer in a future video? And if you need help deploying UniFi in your organization or enterprise, we'd love to help you with that. We're a full service engineering firm. We can help you with everything from design, pre-sales, all the way to complete on-site deployment or multi-site deployment. Well, until I see you guys in the next video, bye for now. But there's a big part of our network that's missing: Wi-Fi. That's part of this part right there. Yeah, then there's a big part of our network that's missing.
Oh, you want to throw it at everything? I thought you wanted to wait for Wi-Fi. You're throwing it at missing. Okay.
Yeah, and then Wi-Fi. Right. We've configured our gateway and our network switch, but there's a big part of our network that's missing. Wi-Fi. That was good though. Was that good or not? Other than my failure at the end.